Hi, this is Eternal King bringing you another LOR video today. So I wanted to talk a little bit more. I've talked a lot about the competitive scene. I've shown off a lot of off-meta decks for Eternal, but I kind of have been seeing things in comments from other streamer videos that a lot of players who play LOR still don't understand the fundamental differences between Standard and Eternal. So I think I'm going to call this video Common Standard versus Eternal Myths that I see circulating around. So the main one that I see is that Standard is more balanced than Eternal. This is quite frankly incorrect. You look at something like anti-aggro beating the last Runeterra Open. Or again, there are similar win rates to be found with things like Zed Gwen. Aggro decks are an absolute menace in Standard, to the point that every other deck basically doesn't need to compete in the game, other than something like mid-range tempo, which is Eddie Galio Morgana. Eddie Galio Morgana being the other big deck, other than your standard aggro packages. Those decks are so strong that they basically eliminate the need to play anything else in the format, more or less. No need to play ramp, no need to play combo, no need to play control. None of those decks are very good in Standard. And the reason for that, and again, I can show this off in a very clean and precise manner, is that a lot of spells are just gone. Yeah, and they're staple cards too. Like when they did rotation, they removed a lot of staple control spells. So one of them is Ravenous Flock. 1 mana, deal 4 to a unit. This card does not exist in Standard, and if we were to build a new deck, or just take on any established deck, and if we were to limit to Standard and then we look up Flock, you see that it doesn't show up, right? So Flock does not exist in Standard. It's a staple control card that's just gone. If we go to Shadow Isles and we look up Vile Feast, and then we flip it to Standard, and it's just gone, right? So a lot of these staple control cards were exceptionally important in the legacy of LOR. And again, I run Vile Feast and Deep, for example. A lot of these staple cards that exist, even Thorny Toad doesn't exist for Deep, which is actually, a pretty good Deep card that you no longer have access to. So like all of these legacy cards that helped balance out certain archetypes are gone in Standard. And in most cases, it was things like anti-aggro tools or essentially turbo leveling tools. So things like Thorny Toad, turbo leveling Deep effectively. Trying to think about some other kind of established spells and archetypes. But yes, so get excited. So Burn and P and Z was removed for things like Jinx decks. So Burn, a lot of Burn was removed. Both Get Excited and Decimate was removed. Sparklefly was removed from elusive decks, so you couldn't make a big, healing elusive unit that could potentially win the game for you. Zoe was removed. Again, a lot of champions were removed from Standard for reasons I don't understand. I don't think that Zoe is an unbalanced card. I think Zoe's a great card. I think you should run Zoe in a great deal of Eternal decks because she's very flexible. Blessing of Targon and Battle Bonds, a lot of these sort of burst elusive tools were taken out of the game. So like basically rotation took what was a an increasingly diverse game like LOR and removed staple cards that were deemed to be irritating or annoying to the pro scene. So when we talk about the most common myth that Standard is more balanced than Eternal, that's not true. Standard is simply just more limited than Eternal. Flock is not an unbalanced card. Flock is a well-designed card that has existed in LOR since vanilla. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's not an unbalanced card. Like, just factually stating, there's nothing unbalanced about Flock. The other thing is like something like Braum. Look at champions that were removed from Eternal. Like, Braum's not an unbalanced card. Even in Eternal, Braum is not problematic. He's not going to be winning any games for you outside of very, small circumstances where you can make him work. But my point is, he's not an unbalanced card. The game did not get better by the removal of Braum. The reality is, what ended up happening is that the pro players got frustrated by running into so many different types of decks and so many different types of archetypes that they could not sustain a successful win rate without limiting the scope of the game. And that's what they mean by more balance. More balance from a pro player's grinding perspective, as in like, I want to grind Annie-Jin, and I want to be the #1 Annie-Jin player that has ever Annie-Jinned before. And this is the deck that won the last Runeterra Open. For that #1 Annie-Jin player, he will objectively do worse in Eternal. Like, he can take this deck, he can run this deck exactly as is, and he can go into Eternal, and he will do worse. Because Vile Feast exists, because Flock exists, because, you know, Blighted Ravine exists. Again, none of these cards, whether it's, you know, Blighted Ravine or Vile Feast or Flock, none of these cards are broken. They're just good anti-aggro tools that, in fact, make the game more balanced, not less balanced. So that's the first myth, is that Eternal is less balanced than Standard. So I want to get rid of that. The second point that I see thrown around is that Eternal is like the Wild Wild West, which, again, depending on your perspective, can either be a good thing or a bad thing. So I'll explain what people mean by that. And typically it is turbo leveling champions. So a lot of pro players, the way they're taught to play the game is non-committal. They don't commit to plays. They don't try to go all in on synergies. They don't try to level up champions, sometimes ever, or very quickly. Eternal is the opposite of that. Most successful Eternal decks will want to turbo level champions, or I call it turbo leveling or auto leveling. They both mean the same thing to me. And basically, it's decks that are highly synergistic and allow the champion to flip in an exceptionally short amount of time. Those decks are very good in Eternal, and they're garbage in Standard. Victor will flip in my Victor deck. Undir will flip in my Undir deck. It's guaranteed. And if I built a deck with these champions where that didn't happen reliably, it would be objectively worse in Eternal. That's just how it goes. Even something like the ramp shell that I showed off, which was, you know, Targon ramp. This is an auto level Asol deck. You play Field of Rush with Asol, and 2 10-10s come out. That means Asol auto flips. So that's an auto level ramp deck. These things are exceptionally good. Another deck that I built recently was Nightfall. And in a Nightfall deck like this, where you have Chained Caster being a free Nightfall activator, every single card that you play until you play Nocturne will be a Nightfall card. You'll be activating Nightfall every single turn. So you're going to play Nightfall, you know, Diana's flipped by turn 4. Nocturne is flipping by turn 4. It's an auto level Nightfall deck because you have enough zero cost cards, and you have Lunari Dustbringer plus the zero cost card guarantees that you hit Nightfall regardless of your curve draw. It's just happening, right? Those cards are auto leveling. So people, you know, who are used to Standard and like a more limited play space where they can kind of stranglehold the options of the opponent through a more limited card selection, they view that as balanced. Instead of balanced, I would say it's advantageous to pro players. Those are different things, right? Again, I will tell you what was unbalanced. Siren Song was an unbalanced card. That is like objectively broke the game, and it had to be nerfed, right? And this is how you know, like, true unbalance means that something has to get nerfed. So Siren Song got nerfed because it was an unbalanced card. It basically turned every single deck into a one-drop spam deck. So it had to get nerfed. That was an unbalanced card. Samara, auto-leveling too fast and providing rally prior to her nerf. Actually, it wasn't even her auto-leveling. It was actually her dragging for free on turn 2. She would just eat a 2-drop for free every single time she got played. And that was too strong. She had to get nerfed. That's unbalanced. So, like, I'm not saying that unbalanced things haven't existed in Eternal in the past. What I'm saying is that when they do exist, they get nerfed. I guess the other deck people might be thinking of is auto-level TF. Yeah, TF Draw is an auto-level deck. But he's an auto-level deck in a format that is filled with auto-level decks. So in that sense, TF is no more unbalanced than anything else, right? It's just that you have to build correctly. Build your Taric Rally deck to auto-level Taric. And, that's how that deck performs. Build your I'll say Rumble deck to, you know, swing with might and push a huge amount of lethal with a rumble with spell shield. You know, everything is just elevated to a higher level in Eternal of the power scale. It's not unbalanced, it's just higher balance. It is that the balance of the game exists on a higher level than Standard, and that's frustrating for pro players who want to control every single variable, which they shouldn't be trying to do at all. For this format, they should be listening to the music, grinding and playing with the jazz. That is the Eternal format. Alright, I hope this video was helpful for you guys and you learned a little bit more about the differences between Standard and Eternal, because it is a very different format if you've been experimenting since Ladders opened up, which I will show you here. You can now play Eternal Ranked. So give that a shot if you guys have any interest. I'm already leveling like insanely fast. I think Grappler's like Plat 4, I'm like Diamond 3, I think Sunny's Plat 4, so in terms of streamers I'm ahead of everyone else on this type of ladder, because it is my format.